"Mom, your health is not my problem." Those were the words I heard at 9:14 a.m., standing inside a neighborhood pharmacy with a white paper bag folded under my arm. The place smelled faintly of rubbing alcohol and lavender hand soap. I remember the hum of the refrigerator behind the counter more clearly than his voice. The cashier didn't look at me when he spoke. His eyes stayed on the screen. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he said, tapping once. "The payment was declined." I thought it was a mistake. I slid my phone out of my purse and opened my banking app, the same way I had 1,000 times before. The numbers took a moment to load. Balance, $48.12. Yesterday morning, that same screen had read $289,600. I sat down hard on the plastic chair by the vitamin aisle and scrolled. There it was. One transfer. One authorization. A neat digital signature. My son's name. I walked outside and lowered myself onto a cold metal bench, the kind bolted to the sidewalk. My prescription sat useless in my lap. People passed with coffee cups and dog leashes, starting ordinary days. I could think only one thing. How could they do this to me? If you want to hear how this began, before the numbers vanished, before the sentence that ended everything, stay with me. Sometimes the deepest betrayal doesn't come from strangers. It comes from home. My name is Margaret Brooks. I am 73 years old, and for most of my life I lived quietly, without drama or spectacle. I worked as a school librarian in Charleston, South Carolina, for nearly 4 decades. A small building with tall shelves, narrow windows, and floors that creaked no matter how softly you walked. Books were my company, and order was my comfort. I was never a wealthy woman. I was a careful one. I saved. I planned. I wrote numbers down in neat columns and checked them twice. My blue-rimmed mug always sat in the same place by the sink, and my mail was opened with a letter opener I had owned since my 30s. Every dollar had a purpose. Medication that grew more expensive each year. A roof that needed repairs after heavy rain. The simple wish to grow old without fear of becoming a burden. I raised one child, my son, Ethan. I raised him alone. His father left early, without arguments or explanations, leaving me with a crib, a job, and a long stretch of responsibility. I worked during the day, read bedtime stories at night, and learned how to fix small things myself because there was no one else to call. I did not resent it. I believed that was love, to give fully and quietly, without keeping score. Ethan grew up smart and capable. He was ambitious, always looking forward, always impatient with anything that moved slowly. He was never cruel. Not then. He called once a week. He came by on holidays. He ate my cooking and told me it tasted the same as when he was a child. I was proud of him. Even when his visits became shorter. Even when his eyes drifted to his phone more often than to my face. I told myself this was normal. Life moves faster for the young. I believed something very simple: if you give love long enough and honestly, it comes back. Not always in words, not always in the way you expect, but it comes back. What I did not see was the slow shift taking place. Somewhere along the way, I stopped being his mother. I became a future event. A number waiting to be accessed. Looking back now, the most painful part is not what he did later. It is how certain I was that love alone would protect me. Because sometimes love is not returned. Sometimes it is simply used. The first crack did not come with shouting or slammed doors. It arrived quietly, disguised as a passing comment, the way most serious damage does. It was a Sunday afternoon in late October. I remember because the air smelled of damp leaves, and a steady rain tapped against the kitchen window. I had a pot of chicken soup warming on the stove, the same recipe I had made for years. Ethan sat at the small wooden table, scrolling through his phone while the steam curled up between us. We were talking about ordinary things. Rising grocery prices. A letter from the insurance company. I mentioned, without complaint, that I wanted to stay cautious with my savings because my doctor had added another medication to my list. That was when he said it. "Mom, you've already lived your life," he said, his eyes never leaving the screen. "Why do you even need that much money?" I laughed. The sound surprised me. It came out thin and uncertain, like a habit instead of a reaction. I told myself he was joking. Young people say careless things. They don't always understand what words can weigh. I stirred the soup. I wiped my hands on a towel. I did not answer him directly. But something shifted inside me. It was not anger. It was colder. It was the feeling of standing in a familiar room and realizing something had been moved when you weren't looking. Nothing obvious. Just enough to make you uneasy. I asked him what he meant. He shrugged. "You're always worrying," he said. "You should relax. Enjoy yourself. You can't take it with you anyway." That sentence followed me long after he left. It echoed while I washed the dishes and dried them carefully, one by one. It stayed with me as I folded laundry and placed my blue-rimmed mug back beside the sink. I had spent my entire life preparing not for luxury, but for dignity. For choice. For independence when my body inevitably slowed down. And suddenly, that careful planning was being spoken of as unnecessary, even selfish. After that day, the questions began. Not about my health. Not about how I was sleeping. About numbers. How much was the house worth now? Did I still have the investment account from my retirement years? Who helped me manage my finances? When I spoke about doctor appointments, his attention drifted. When I mentioned money, his tone sharpened. "You worry too much," he told me once. "You don't trust people enough," he said another time. I started to feel myself being repositioned in my own life. Less like a mother. More like a problem to be solved. A resource to be organized. I told myself not to overthink it. This was my son. The child whose fevers I had stayed up with. The boy whose lunchbox I packed every morning with careful notes tucked inside. Trust doesn't vanish all at once. It erodes. Quietly. And at the time, I still believed concern was what I was hearing. I did not yet understand that it was calculation. After that autumn, my life began to narrow in small, almost invisible ways. Nothing dramatic changed at once. There were no arguments, no raised voices, no clear moment I could point to and say, "This is where it turned." It was a collection of quiet adjustments, each one reasonable on its own. Ethan called less often. When he did, the conversations felt rushed, like he had already moved on to the next thing before I finished a sentence. He stopped asking how my days were structured and started asking how my accounts were organized. "You still use the same bank?" he asked once. "Yes," I said. "Online access is easier now," he replied. "You should really update things." When I mentioned my arthritis acting up, he changed the subject. When I mentioned a medical bill, his tone sharpened, just slightly. "You don't need to worry so much," he said. "You're fine." I began to feel as though my discomfort was inconvenient. My worries were inefficient. My caution, unnecessary. He offered to help. That was the word he used. Help with paperwork. Help with online forms. Help with simplifying things in case something ever happened. I hesitated. I had always managed my own affairs. But he was my son, and I was tired more often than I used to be. The small print blurred. The passwords multiplied. "It's just a formality," he said, sliding a document across my dining table one afternoon. "This way I can step in if there's ever an emergency." I read it carefully. Or at least, I thought I did. The language was polite and technical, wrapped in reassurance. I signed, believing I was preparing for the worst, not inviting it closer. After that, changes accelerated. He suggested consolidating accounts. He recommended moving funds to keep them active. He spoke confidently, impatiently, as if my questions were slowing him down. "You trust me, don't you?" he asked once, smiling without warmth. I told myself trust was what mothers did. I noticed payments I didn't recognize. Small at first. Then larger. When I asked, he had explanations ready. Temporary. Just reallocations. I'll put it back. My health worsened that spring. More appointments. More prescriptions. Less energy to argue. And slowly, without ceremony, my role shifted again. I was no longer even a resource. I was an obstacle. A signature to obtain. A voice to quiet. The house felt different. My blue-rimmed mug sat untouched some mornings. Mail arrived already opened. I told myself I was imagining things. I wasn't. By the time I sensed real danger, most of the doors had already been opened from the inside. The morning it happened began like any other. I woke before sunrise, the house still and cool, and stood at the kitchen sink waiting for the kettle to boil. My blue-rimmed mug was warm in my hands. Outside, a delivery truck passed, its low rumble fading down the street. Nothing warned me. Nothing felt urgent yet. I gathered my purse, my prescription slip, and my coat. The doctor had stressed I shouldn't skip this medication. My joints were already stiff, my chest tight on colder mornings. I locked the door carefully, the same way I always did, and drove to the pharmacy I had used for years. Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed. A mother stood ahead of me with a child tugging at her sleeve. When it was my turn, I slid the prescription across the counter and waited, thinking about what I would cook for dinner. The cashier tapped at his screen, frowned slightly, and tried again. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he said, still not looking at me. The payment was declined. I smiled, embarrassed. "That can't be right," I said. "Please try again." He did. Then he turned the screen toward me. Declined. I stepped aside, my heart beating harder than it should have. I opened my banking app, my fingers steady from years of habit. The loading circle spun longer than usual. Balance, $48. 12. I stared at the screen, waiting for it to correct itself. Yesterday, before bed, I had checked out of routine. $289,600. Enough to breathe. Enough to feel safe. I scrolled. There it was. A single transfer, clean and complete. My account emptied in one motion. The authorization line sat beneath it like a final period at the end of a sentence. Authorized by E. Brooks. My son. I walked outside because I couldn't breathe properly inside. The metal bench was cold through my coat as I sat down. Cars passed. A woman laughed into her phone. Life continued, indifferent. I called Ethan. He answered on the third ring. "There's a problem with my account," I said calmly. My voice sounded older than I felt. "I can't pay for my medication." There was a pause. Not confusion. Not concern. "That's not my problem," he said. "You should have planned better." I closed my eyes. "You moved my money," I said. "All of it." Silence, then a sigh, impatient. "I did what needed to be done," he said. "You don't need it anymore." In that moment, I understood something with absolute clarity. The money was gone, yes. But what hurt most was not the number on the screen. It was the certainty in his voice. He had already decided I no longer mattered. I sat on that bench until the cold climbed through my coat and into my bones. The pharmacy bag rested on my lap like a small insult. A part of me wanted to walk back inside and explain, to make the cashier understand I wasn't careless, that I wasn't some confused old woman who had forgotten her PIN number. But the truth was simpler and worse, I had been outmaneuvered. I drove home slowly, hands steady on the wheel. At every red light I opened my phone again, as if the numbers might change if I looked long enough. They did not. The transfer sat there, clean, final, time-stamped, like a door locked from the other side. Before I did anything else, I returned to the counter and asked them to hold the prescription for a day. My voice shook only once, on the word please. The pharmacist, a woman with silver hair pinned tight, looked up and met my eyes. "Do you have anyone who can help you today?" she asked. "I have myself," I said. It sounded thin, but it was true. At home I set my purse on the table and pulled out my folder for important things. Deeds. Insurance. The copy of my will. I had always believed organization was a kind of protection. That afternoon, I needed it to be more than a belief. I opened my laptop and searched my email. Messages I'd dismissed as routine: new document available, account update, signature received. I clicked each one, heart thudding, and printed them out. The printer whirred, spitting page after page onto the tray like it was confessing for me. One notice, dated 3 weeks earlier, made my stomach drop: power of attorney uploaded. The subject line was so bland it could have been a coupon. I read it twice, then a third time, until the words blurred. I had not uploaded anything. I had signed a paper Ethan placed in front of me, and he had turned it into a key. I lined the evidence on the table. The transfer confirmation. The authorization record. The email notices. A copy of the form with my signature, crooked, rushed, done on a day I remembered because my hands hurt from an appointment and I was too tired to argue about details. There is a particular kind of shame that comes with realizing you were careful, and still not careful enough. I did not call Ethan again. I did not call my sister to cry. I made tea and stood by the sink with my blue-rimmed mug warming my palms until my thoughts stopped spinning. Then I started making calls. The bank's representative spoke kindly, but her kindness had limits. Dates, amounts, verification questions. She told me what I suspected: there was an authorization on file. A document. A signature. "Is this your son?" she asked. "Yes," I said, and the word tasted like pennies. She explained what could be frozen, what required a dispute, what depended on the wording of that paperwork. When we hung up, I didn't feel peace. I felt resolve. The second call was to a lawyer whose name I found in a church bulletin. I chose him because his office was close and because his receptionist answered in a calm, practiced voice that did not treat me like a nuisance. I carried my papers in a canvas tote, the handles cutting into my fingers. In his office the air smelled faintly of copier ink and lemon polish. He read quietly, turning pages with the kind of care that made me want to breathe again. "This," he said at last, tapping the document I remembered signing at my dining table, "is broader than you realized." I nodded. I didn't defend myself. I didn't explain how tired I'd been, how trusting. None of that mattered now. "What can I do?" I asked. He laid out steps in plain language. Revoke the authorization. Notify the bank in writing. Open a new account in my name only. Redirect what little income one still had. Place what remained into a structure that required my consent, not someone else's impatience. "Do you want to press charges?" he asked gently. I looked at my hands: thin skin, small veins, an old ink stain on one finger from balancing my checkbook the old-fashioned way. "I want to be safe," I said. "And I want it to stop." That week I did 3 things without announcing them to anyone who didn't need to know. I revoked his access. I changed my will. And I set up a trust with clear instructions: medical needs first, housing second, and only then, if anything remained, gifts to people who had shown up with respect, not entitlement. I bought bread, soup, and a small bunch of lavender with the cash I had left. I wasn't embarrassed. I was practical. Survival strips life down to what is necessary and honest. The pharmacist called later and arranged a small emergency supply while the payment mess was sorted. I thanked her, and my throat tightened, not from weakness, but from relief that kindness still existed, even if it wasn't coming from my own child. When the paperwork was filed, I walked out of the lawyer's office into bright afternoon sun. The world looked the same, but my place inside it had shifted. For the first time in a long while, I was not waiting to be handled. I was handling my life. That night I placed the documents back in their folder, slid it into the drawer, and set my mug in the sink. The house was quiet, but it no longer felt like a place where someone else could reach in and take what they wanted. It felt like mine again. I also did something that felt strangely personal. I changed the locks. Not for drama, just for clarity. The locksmith was an older man with rough hands and a patient manner. He didn't ask questions. He replaced the cylinders, tested each key twice, and set the new metal pieces into my palm. The keys felt heavier than they should have, like proof. At the post office I filled out a forwarding form for my mail to a locked box. I updated passwords I hadn't touched in years. I canceled a few automatic payments Ethan had helped set up, the ones that no longer made sense when I traced them back. Each small correction was a stitch closing a tear I had pretended wasn't there. Finally, I wrote him one message, short, factual, and finished. Ethan, your authorization has been revoked. Do not contact my bank or my attorney. Any communication goes through me, in writing. I stared at the screen for a long time before I sent it. My finger hovered. I thought about the boy he had been, the way he used to lean his head against my shoulder when he was sick. Then I thought about the sentence he'd spoken into my ear like I was disposable. I pressed send. The sound was barely anything, a soft click. But inside me it landed like a door closing, clean and final. I did not feel triumphant. I felt tired, and oddly steady. The betrayal was still there, sharp as paper cuts, but my fear had begun to loosen its grip. I slept that night with the drawer shut, the folder in place, and the new keys on the table where I could see them when I woke. In the morning, sunlight touched my kitchen tiles, and I realized I was here, mine again. The consequences did not arrive with thunder. They arrived the way bills do, on schedule, indifferent to excuses. For a few days after my message, Ethan stayed quiet. No calls. No apologies. I imagined him pacing in whatever new office space he had rented for his projects, telling himself he still had time to turn things around. I pictured him believing I would soften, that I would panic, that I would reach for him the way I always had. Instead, the first contact came on a Friday evening at 6:02 p.m. My phone lit up with his name. I let it ring out. A minute later, a text appeared. Mom, answer. This is urgent. I watched the screen until it went dark again. Then I set the phone face down on the table and finished washing the dishes. The next morning, my sister called. Her voice had that careful brightness people use when they are trying to keep the peace. Margaret, she said, Ethan told me there's been a misunderstanding. It isn't a misunderstanding, I replied. I kept my tone gentle. It's paperwork. It's transfers. It's real. She sighed, the way she always did when she wanted me to be the reasonable one. He said he only moved it temporarily. He said you're overreacting. I looked at the folder in my drawer, the printed confirmations aligned like receipts for a theft. If I'm overreacting, I said, then he can fix it through the bank and my attorney. There was a pause, long enough for me to hear her swallow. He's your son, she tried again. And I was his mother when he emptied my account, I said. That didn't stop him. After that, the call spread outward like ripples. A cousin I hadn't spoken to in years. A church friend of Ethan's who I barely knew. Even an old neighbor who started with, I don't want to get involved, but. They all used the same phrases, as if they'd been handed a script. He's under pressure. He didn't mean it. You know how men are with money. You'll regret being harsh. I listened once. Twice. Then I began to repeat my own line, the way you repeat your address to a dispatcher. My finances are being handled legally, I said. I won't discuss it. People dislike boundaries when they benefit from your softness. I heard it in the sudden coolness, the offended silence, the little huffs before they hung up. Then, on the following Tuesday, Ethan came to my house. I saw his car through the front window. My stomach tightened, but I did not move. The new locks held. He knocked once, then twice, harder. "Mom," he called. "Open up." I walked to the door, not close enough to touch it, and spoke through the wood. "What do you need, Ethan?" His voice softened instantly, honey poured over steel. "Just talk to me. Please." "Put it in writing," I said. He tried the old door handle out of habit and got nothing. I heard the small, surprised rattle. "Are you kidding me?" He snapped, and the honey vanished. "No," I said. "I'm not." He lowered his voice again. "My accounts are frozen. I can't access the funds. I have payments due. I have investors asking questions." There it was. Not concern for my medication. Not shame for what he'd done. A problem in his life that needed my resources. "You shouldn't have used my money," I said. "It was going to be ours eventually," he shot back. "What difference does it make if I used it now?" The words landed in the hallway like something broken. "It makes the difference between love and entitlement," I said. "And between my safety and your gamble." He knocked again, angry now, palms flat on the door. "You're ruining me." I breathed in slowly. The house smelled faintly of lemon polish and lavender from the small bunch I'd placed on the counter. "No," I said. "You did that." For a long moment there was only his breathing on the other side, sharp and frustrated. Then his tone shifted, smaller, pleading. "Mom, I'll pay it back. I swear. Just unlock it. Just tell them it was a mistake." "I can't," I said, and it was the truth. "And I won't." He went quiet. I heard him step back, heard his shoes on the porch boards. Then, very softly, he tried one last thing. "You're going to die alone," he said. I did not flinch. I did not answer with cruelty. I answered with fact. "I'm going to live with dignity," I said. "And you will not buy it with my fear." He left without another word. When his car backed out, the tires crunched the gravel like an ugly punctuation mark. That evening an email arrived from an unknown address, a long paragraph full of accusations and blame. I forwarded it to my attorney and deleted it from my inbox. My hands didn't shake. I felt tired, yes, but not lost. The next week, I heard through my sister that Ethan had missed a flight for a meeting he'd bragged about. His card had been declined at the airport hotel. The investors weren't investors at all, just friends he'd promised returns to. Without my money, the whole structure sagged and showed its cheap beams. And still, the strangest part was this: once the noise died down, my house was quieter than it had been in years. The air felt clearer. I could hear my own thoughts again. I stopped expecting him to become someone he wasn't willing to be. I stopped waiting for an apology that would never arrive in the shape I needed. Natural consequences did their work, the way gravity does. Not as revenge, not as a performance, just as reality. And reality, at last, was on my side. 2 days later a certified letter arrived from the bank, confirming the revocation had been recorded and that any attempt to act under the old authority would be flagged. I placed it in the folder with the rest, the thick paper smelling faintly of toner and finality. By the end of that month, the truth had reached the places Ethan tried to keep polished. A contractor called me directly because a deposit check from Ethan had bounced and my home address was on the paperwork. I told him, calmly, that I was not responsible, and gave him my attorney's number. He apologized as if I were the one causing trouble. At church the next Sunday, a woman I'd known for years squeezed my hand and whispered, "He's been through a lot." I nodded and said, "So have I." I didn't explain. Silence, used properly, can be a boundary. Ethan's texts turned bitter. "You're selfish. You'll regret this." I forwarded each one to my attorney and went back to my routines: tea, pills, paper statements, new passwords. What happened to him wasn't a single dramatic fall. It was a series of closed doors. A lender declined him, a lease didn't renew, friends stopped answering. When you build on someone else's money, you don't crash once. You sink as the borrowed air runs out. The hardest call came from my sister, her voice small with disappointment. "Can't you just help him get back on his feet?" she asked. I looked at my blue-rimmed mug, steady in my hands, and said, "I am getting back on mine." That was the only answer I had left. Exhale. I did not leave in the middle of the night. There was no suitcase dragged across the floor, no dramatic farewell. I stayed until the paperwork settled and the noise faded, until my house felt like a place I had already outgrown. Then, one quiet Monday, I packed only what I needed. I kept the blue-rimmed mug. A framed photograph from the library staff room, taken on my retirement day. A lavender candle I had never lit because I was saving it. I sold the house to a young couple who loved the creak of the floors and said thank you too often. I watched them stand in the doorway, imagining a future, and felt no bitterness. That chapter had held enough. I moved south, closer to the water, into a small apartment with wide windows and a balcony just big enough for a chair. In the mornings, I drink tea and listen to gulls argue over nothing important. The air smells like salt instead of old carpet. My days are quieter now, but they are mine. I volunteer twice a week at a literacy center. Children sound out words slowly, proudly, the way I once taught their parents. On Thursdays, I walk with a woman named June who laughs too loud and tells the truth too easily. We share oranges on a bench and compare aches without competing. No one asks me what I'm worth. I manage my money the same way I always have, carefully, respectfully, but without fear pressing on my chest. The trust does its work in the background, like a locked door that doesn't need watching. My medications are filled on time. The pharmacist knows my name again. Ethan has not called. Once, a letter arrived. No return address. 3 sentences, uneven handwriting, heavy with regret and still lighter on responsibility. I read it once, folded it, and placed it in a drawer. I did not answer. Silence, I have learned, can be an honest response. People sometimes ask if I'm lonely. I tell them no. Loneliness is being needed only for what you provide. Peace is being valued for who you are. I have peace. I no longer wait for apologies to unlock my future. I no longer confuse endurance with love. I choose where my time goes. I choose who has access. In the evenings, I light the lavender candle and sit by the window as the sky changes its mind about color. I think about the woman I was, the one who believed love always came back if you gave enough of it, and I feel tenderness, not shame. She did her best with what she knew. And now, I do better with what I've learned. Sometimes love isn't forgiveness. Sometimes love is walking away while you still recognize yourself. If this story touched a nerve, you belong here. Subscribe to hear truths where silence becomes strength. I chose myself. And life finally chose me back.